The summer that year hit Tulsa like a fist through drywall, fast, ugly, and without warning. Lena Garret was 24 years old and already behind on 3 months of rent for the garage space she called both her workshop and, on the worst nights, her bed. The place sat on the corner of Admiral and Mingo, wedged between a tire shop that closed at noon and a bail bondsman who never seemed to close at all. The sign above the door said Garret Auto and Repair. In letters she'd painted herself the year her father passed, using the same brush he'd used to paint her bike helmet when she was 7. She'd kept the brush. She couldn't say why. She wasn't the kind of person who talked about her situation. You wouldn't know, looking at her, that the last real meal she'd had was a gas station sandwich the day before, or that the transmission job she'd spent 11 hours on had just been picked up without payment. The man driving off while she was still wiping grease off her forearm, laughing about something on his phone. She didn't call the police. She knew how that went. She just wrote the number in a notebook she kept under the workbench next to every other number she hadn't collected and went back to work. What she had was her hands and what they knew how to do. Her father, Douglas Garret, had started the garage 22 years ago with a floor jack, a borrowed socket set, and a philosophy that was simple to the point of being almost embarrassing. Do the work right, do it honest, do it once. He'd said it so many times that Lena heard it in his voice even now, years after the stroke that took him quietly on a Tuesday morning, while she was in the next room making coffee. She'd heard the sound of something falling. She hadn't understood what that sound meant until she walked through the door and saw. She kept the garage not because it was profitable. It wasn't, but because it was the only place in the world where she still felt him in the room. That Thursday in August, the temperature hit 103 before noon. Lena had the garage bay door open all the way, but the air coming in off the street felt like breathing through a wool blanket. She was under the frame of a 1994 Ford Ranger that belonged to a woman named Mrs. Okafor from the church on 46th, doing brake work that Mrs. Okafor couldn't afford but needed done regardless. When she heard the sound from the parking lot across the street, she heard it before she saw anything. Raised voices first, sharp and quick, the way voices got when something had already gone past talking. Then the lower sound underneath it, the kind that didn't belong to the voices, a grunt. The flat, specific sound of a boot connecting with something that wasn't the ground. Lena rolled out from under the truck. Across the 2-lane street, in the lot next to the closed-down Radio Shack, 4 of them had him surrounded. The man on the ground was big, broad through the shoulders, the kind of big that took decades and hard living to build. Wearing a leather vest with patches she recognized from 20 feet away. His name, she'd learn later, was Raymond Patch Corey. He was 61 years old, a 17-year member of the Iron Valley MC, and he was having what his doctor had told him 3 weeks prior was a series of cardiac arrhythmia episodes that left him dizzy and weak without warning, like someone reached into his chest and turned a dial. He hadn't told his chapter. He didn't know how to say something like that out loud, to men who'd ridden with him for nearly 2 decades. He'd felt the episode coming on while he was walking back to his bike from the pharmacy. He'd made it to the lot before his legs stopped cooperating. The 4 who'd found him there were somewhere between 17 and 22, and they'd made a calculation the way people make calculations when they think no one is watching and the math seems easy. One old man, down already, vest that might have something in the pockets. Lena was across the street in the time it took her to drop the brake caliper. She wasn't thinking. That was the honest truth of it, and she'd say so later. There wasn't a moment of weighing options or steeling herself. There was just the sight of a man on the ground being kicked, and her body had already made the decision before her mind caught up. She had a breaker bar in her right hand. She'd grabbed it off the bench on the way out, the way you grab your keys, automatic. And she came into that parking lot fast and without announcement. Hey, one word. The way she said it stopped 2 of them mid-movement. Not because she was loud, because she wasn't. Back up. 3 seconds passed. The 2 who'd stopped were looking at her. The other 2 were looking at the 2 who'd stopped, trying to read the room. She stepped between them and the man on the ground, the breaker bar loose in her hand, not raised, just there. She looked at each of them once, just once. Now, they left. Not running, they were too proud for that, but walking fast, not looking back, the kind of exit that tried to look like a choice and fooled nobody. She knelt down next to Raymond Corey and didn't touch him until he looked at her. Are you hurt? His eyes focused slowly. My chest, he said. It's not a heart attack. I know what a heart attack feels like. It's something else. He paused. I was heading to my bike. You're not heading anywhere right now, she said. Can you sit up? He could. It took a minute. She didn't call an ambulance immediately because he told her not to. And she understood, in the way that people from certain kinds of lives understand certain things, that there were reasons a man might not want an ambulance. She got him to his feet slowly and walked him across the street to the garage, where it was at least slightly cooler, and she sat him in the rolling chair she used at the workbench and got him water and asked him his name. Raymond, he said. Most people call me Patch. Lena, she said. She watched his color for the next 20 minutes. When it came back enough that she trusted it, she asked him again if he wanted her to call someone. He said yes. He gave her a number. She didn't ask whose it was. What she didn't know was that a man named Curtis, who worked at the bail bondsman next door and spent most of his shifts watching the street out the window because there was nothing else to do, had recorded the whole thing on his phone. Not for any particular reason. Just because it was happening and his phone was in his hand, he posted it that night. By morning, it had 40,000 views. Lena didn't have social media. She found out about the video the way she found out about most things. From someone else, 2 days later when Mrs. Okafor came back to pick up her truck and showed her the screen before Lena had even gotten the keys off the hook. The footage was shaky, shot from a second-floor angle through a window. It showed the lot, the four of them around a figure on the ground, and then a woman coming across the street carrying something long and thin. You couldn't hear what she said, but you could see them leave. The caption Curtis had written was 6 words. She didn't even break her stride. Lena watched the video once and handed the phone back without saying anything. She went back to work. She didn't think about it again until Friday afternoon, when 3 motorcycles pulled into the garage lot and parked in a line so straight it looked rehearsed. She was in the middle of a timing chain job. She came out from under the hood with her hands still dirty and looked at the 3 men standing by their bikes and said nothing, because she had learned early that in situations like this, silence was almost always the right starting position. The one in the middle was taller than the other 2. He had gray at his temples and the kind of face that had stopped being young a long time ago and was the better for it. His name was Leonard Big L Doss, and he was the road captain for the Iron Valley MC's Tulsa chapter. He'd been riding for 31 years. He'd known Raymond Corey since they were both young men making bad decisions in the same zip code. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the garage, the hand-painted sign, the swept lot, the truck in the bay with the hood up, the tools laid out in the order she used them. Patch told us what you did, he said. Lena nodded once. You do this work alone? Yes. How long? 4 years. The garage has been here 22. He looked at the truck in the bay again. What's that, a timing chain? Yes. Whose truck? Lady from the church on 46th. He paused. She paying you? Lena was quiet for a beat too long. Big L made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He looked at the man on his right, a wide, quiet man named Spencer who everyone called Spool for reasons that had been funny once and were now just his name, and then back at Lena. We're going to leave you to your work, he said. But we'll be back Saturday, if that's all right. It wasn't a question entirely. But it also right, she said. They came back Saturday. Not 3 of them. 7. They came with 2 trucks in addition to the bikes, and the trucks had things in them. A rolling tool chest that still had the hardware store sticker on the side, a floor jack that was newer than anything Lena owned, 2 shop lights with magnetic bases, and a case of the kind of oil that Lena usually only bought 1 quart at a time when she absolutely had to. They didn't ask permission. They didn't make a ceremony of it. They set things down in the places where things should go, and the man named Spool looked at the brake lathe she'd been nursing along for 2 years with a stripped gear and said, I can fix that today if you've got the part. She had the part. She'd had it for 6 months, waiting until she could afford a machinist to do what needed doing. Spool fixed it in 40 minutes. Raymond, Patch, came separately, arriving after the others. He still moved carefully, but better. He'd been to a cardiologist by then, started a medication that was helping. He stood in the doorway of the garage bay and looked at Lena working alongside his people, and the expression on his face was not one he would have been able to describe easily. He walked over and stood next to her while she worked. I heard you didn't watch the video more than once, he said. Once was enough to know what happened, she said. I was there. You know how many people watched it? She'd been told a number. It seemed abstract, the comments, he said. You want to know what most of them said? She kept her hands moving. They said they would have done the same thing, he said. And I believe some of them, maybe. But they weren't there, and you were, and there's a difference between what you do and what you do. He paused. Your daddy taught you that? She stopped working. Just for a second. How'd you know about my dad? I asked around. Patch said unapologetically. Douglas Garret. Good man. People remember him. She didn't answer for a moment. He taught me a lot of things, she said finally. That was one of them. Patch nodded. Mine too. Shame it doesn't stick for everyone. What came next wasn't dramatic and it wasn't quick. That was the part that people who heard the story secondhand sometimes got wrong. They imagined a moment, a ceremony, a declaration. There wasn't one. There was just gradually a pattern. The Iron Valley MC started sending work to Garret Auto and Repair. Not charity. Work, real work at real rates, paid on time. Bikes, mostly, but also personal vehicles. A van one of their members used for a small moving business. A truck that belonged to a man named Vic who ran a food stand out of it on weekends. Lena did the work the way her father had taught her to do it. Right, honest once. Word moved the way word moves in a community where trust is currency and gets spent carefully. An auto shop owner named Gary Brentwood, who'd known Big L for 15 years, sent over a fleet account. A small one, 3 vehicles, but steady. A woman named Patricia Mays, who ran a home healthcare service, needed her fleet inspected quarterly and had stopped trusting the dealership that kept charging her for things that didn't need doing. She came to Lena based on a recommendation she received from someone she trusted. and after the first inspection, she stayed. Mrs. Okafor told people at her church. 3 of them became regulars. None of this happened in a week or even a month. It happened the way things actually happen, slowly and then faster. And then one morning, Lena realized she'd been at the workbench since 6, and it was now 2 in the afternoon, and she hadn't thought once about the electric bill. The video kept circulating. Someone made a longer version with music. Someone else put it in a compilation of moments of courage that got passed around on various platforms and found audiences Lena would never know about. People watching in states she'd never been to, in countries she'd never visited, sending comments into a void she didn't inhabit. The ones who knew her didn't treat her differently. That was what she'd wanted, though she hadn't said it. Big L came by one morning in October when the air had finally broken, and the garage was pleasant for the first time in months. He came alone, no ceremony, parked his bike on the street, and came in and poured himself coffee from the pot she kept on the filing cabinet without asking, because by October he didn't need to ask. Patch wants to know if you can look at his Road King, he said. He's getting a vibration at speed he doesn't like. Tell him bring it by Tuesday. I'll tell him. He drank his coffee. He also wants to know if you'd eat dinner with us Saturday. The chapter. Nothing formal, she considered this. Your chapter eat together regularly, she said. We try, he said. It's not always dignified. I'll be there, she said. She went. It was not, as promised, particularly dignified. There were 17 people in Spool's backyard, including 4 who weren't members, but were connected in the way that people get connected over years of proximity and shared reliability. There was food that someone had clearly put real time into and beer that nobody had put any thought into. There was a dog named Governor who had opinions about the seating arrangements. Someone told a story about a ride they'd taken 3 years ago that seemed to have no ending and didn't need one. Patch sat across from Lena and didn't make a speech, and didn't thank her again, and didn't treat her like a symbol of anything. He passed her the potato salad and asked her what she thought about the carburetor setup on the older Evo motors compared to fuel injection, and she had a lot of thoughts about that, and they talked until the sun went down. On the drive home, she had a truck of her own now, bought used, running better than it had any right to because she'd done the work herself. She thought about what her father used to say about the garage. He hadn't built it to get famous. He hadn't built it expecting recognition. He'd built it because he was good at the work and because people needed it done. And because being good at something honest was a way of being in the world that he could stand behind when the day was over. She'd inherited the work. She'd inherited the philosophy. She hadn't known, starting out, whether those were enough. They were enough. 3 months after the video, a local paper called Lena to ask if she'd give an interview. She declined politely. The reporter asked if she could at least explain what went through her mind when she crossed the street. She thought about it for a moment. I'd seen enough people stand and watch, she said. I didn't want to be one of them. The reporter wrote it down. She said thank you and hung up and went back to the garage and got back under the truck and kept working. That's what it looked like from the outside. On the inside, it was simpler and harder than that, the way most true things are. She'd crossed the street because someone was being hurt, and she was close enough to do something about it. And her father's voice in her head had said what it always said, do it right, do it honest, do it once. She'd done it once. It turned out that was all it took.